Jamie Silver pulled his thin jacket tighter as the autumn wind cut through the park. At 13, he was too small for last year's clothes, but there wasn't money for new ones, not with Grandma's medicine costing what it did. Just 2 more bags, Jamie whispered to himself, his breath making little clouds in the late afternoon air. The recycling center closed at 6, and he needed those extra $3. Every penny counted now. The park was nearly empty as daylight faded, just a few hurried pedestrians cutting through on their way home. Jamie moved quickly from trash can to trash can, fishing out aluminum cans and plastic bottles, careful not to make a mess that might attract attention from park security. The last thing he needed was to be chased away from his best collection spot. Jamie checked his watch, a cracked Timex that had belonged to his father. Dad had been gone 3 years now, along with Mom. The car accident that took them both had changed everything, leaving Jamie with only his grandmother. She'd been his rock, his constant, even as her health began to fail. 20 minutes, he murmured, picking up his pace. That's when he saw it. Something leather and square, half buried beneath scattered leaves near the park bench. At first he thought it might be a book someone had dropped, but as he got closer, he realized it was a wallet, an expensive one. Jamie looked around. The park had emptied now, shadows growing longer as evening approached. Nobody was watching. Nobody would know. With trembling fingers, he picked up the wallet, surprised by the softness of the leather. This wasn't some cheap thing from a discount store. This belonged to someone with money. Real money. "Hello?" Jamie called out, his voice sounding smaller than he'd intended. "Did someone lose a wallet?" No answer came except the rustle of leaves in the wind. Jamie's heart pounded as he slowly opened the wallet. He needed to find ID to know who it belonged to. The first thing he saw made his breath catch. Cash. More cash than he'd seen in one place since before his parents died. $100 bills, neatly arranged. He counted quickly. $2,000. $2,000. The number echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. That was 4 months of rent. That was Grandma's medicine for half a year. That was a winter coat that actually fit, and shoes without holes, and maybe even enough left over for that used camera he'd been eyeing in the pawn shop window. His hands trembled as he continued looking through the wallet. Credit cards, platinum ones, business cards with important-sounding names. And then the driver's license. Jamie blinked hard, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. Meryl Streep. The Meryl Streep. "No way," Jamie whispered, staring at the photo. But there was no mistaking that face. How many times had he and Grandma watched her movies on their old TV? Grandma loved the classics, said Meryl was the greatest actress of any generation. Jamie sank onto the park bench, the wallet heavy in his hands. $2,000. He could change everything with that. Money. No one would know. She probably had millions. Would she even miss this? What would Dad say? Jamie asked the darkening sky. He already knew the answer. His father's voice was so clear in his memory. Character is what you do when nobody's watching. Jamie. And his grandmother, just last week when he'd found $5 on the sidewalk and brought it home, she'd made him put it in their found things jar. "We're not rich in money," she'd said, her arthritic hands shaking as she screwed the lid back on, "but we're wealthy in what matters." Jamie looked down at the wallet again, at Meryl Streep's face on the license. He remembered reading that she was in town filming something. That meant he might actually be able to find her, to return this. The recycling center would be closing soon. $3 wouldn't be coming home with him tonight. But the wallet would. As Jamie walked the 12 blocks back to their apartment building, his mind raced with possibilities. Every step was a battle between need and integrity. The cash in the wallet would solve so many problems. Grandma needed her medicine. The rent was due in a week. The electricity had already been shut off once this year. But each time temptation whispered, Jamie's grip on the wallet tightened. This wasn't his. Taking it wouldn't solve their problems. It would only create new ones inside him that no amount of money could fix. Their apartment building came into view. A shabby 5-story walk-up with peeling paint and security doors that hadn't worked in years. Home, such as it was. Jamie paused at the bottom of the stairwell, taking a deep breath before beginning the climb to the 4th floor. Grandma would be waiting, probably worried sick that he was late. As he reached their door, Jamie could hear the television through the thin walls. One of the old movies Grandma loved. He turned his key in the lock and stepped inside. "Jamie, is that you?" Her voice sounded weaker today. "Yeah, Grandma, it's me." Jamie set down his half-filled bag of recyclables and moved to the small living room where his grandmother sat bundled in blankets despite the apartment's stuffiness. "You're late, I was worried." Her face was pale, eyes sunken with fatigue, but her smile still brightened the room. "I found something, Grandma." Jamie sat beside her, the wallet still in his jacket pocket. "Something important." "What's that, dear?" she asked, turning down the volume on an old Meryl Streep movie. Ironically enough, Jamie pulled out the wallet and placed it on her lap. "It belongs to her," he said, pointing to the screen where Meryl Streep was delivering an emotional monologue. Grandmother's eyes widened as she carefully opened the wallet. "Oh my, Jamie, where did you find this?" "In the park. There's $2,000 inside." $2,000. Her voice trailed off as she looked at her grandson, understanding flickering in her tired eyes. She knew exactly what that money could mean for them. "I'm going to return it," Jamie said firmly. "Tomorrow, I think she's filming downtown." His grandmother reached out, her paper-thin skin cool against his cheek. "James Edward Silver," she said, using his full name the way she did when she was most proud of him. "You are your father's son." "We could really use that money, Grandma," Jamie admitted, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. "But not like this," she replied, closing the wallet and handing it back to him. "Never like this." That night, Jamie lay awake on the pull-out couch, the wallet secured beneath his pillow. Tomorrow would mean missing school, risking trouble. But some things were more important than perfect attendance. Tomorrow he would find Meryl Streep and return her wallet. Little did Jamie know that this simple act of integrity would set in motion events that would transform his life in ways he could never imagine, creating connections to his future that seemed almost too perfect to be just chance. Morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains as Jamie carefully placed Meryl Streep's wallet in his backpack. He'd emptied his school notebooks to make room, knowing today's education wouldn't come from textbooks. "I made you toast," Grandma called from their tiny kitchen, her voice strained from the effort of standing at the counter. "You should be resting," Jamie said, rushing to help her back to her chair. "Nonsense. My grandson needs breakfast before his big mission." She smiled, but Jamie noticed the tremor in her hands had worsened. The prescription bottle on the counter was nearly empty, another expense they couldn't afford. Jamie ate quickly, his mind racing. He'd spent half the night researching on their ancient laptop where Meryl Streep might be filming. A local news article mentioned Providence Square, where a period drama was being shot this week. "Providence Square is on the other side of the city," Jamie explained, spreading out a bus map. "I'll need to take the 42 downtown, then transfer to the 16. Grandma pressed 2 bus tokens into his palm. "These are for emergencies. I'd say this qualifies." Jamie swallowed hard, knowing those tokens were supposed to last her the month for doctor visits. "I'll pay you back, I promise." "I know you will." She patted his hand. "Be careful. People aren't always kind to children alone in the city." Jamie nodded, shouldering his backpack. The wallet inside felt impossibly heavy with responsibility. The bus was crowded with morning commuters who paid no attention to the small boy clutching his backpack to his chest. Jamie watched the neighborhoods change through smudged windows, from their rundown area to the gleaming downtown high-rises, then toward the renovated historic district where Providence Square sat nestled among cobblestone streets. Jamie checked his father's watch. The journey had already taken 2 hours, and his stomach growled with hunger. He'd skipped lunch to save the apple in his backpack for later. Providence Square bustled with activity when Jamie arrived. Production trailers lined the streets, security, guards stood at makeshift barriers, and harried crew members rushed about with equipment. Jamie approached a barrier where a bored-looking guard scrolled through his phone. "Excuse me," Jamie said, his voice cracking slightly. "I need to see Meryl." "Streep." The guard didn't even look up. "Yeah, you and everyone else, kid. No fans allowed on set." "But I found her wallet," Jamie insisted. "I need to return it to her." This got the guard's attention. He looked Jamie up and down, taking in his worn clothes and scuffed shoes. "Right. Let me guess, you found a celebrity's wallet and need to return it personally." His air quotes made his skepticism clear. "Move along before I call someone to escort you away." Jamie's face burned with humiliation, but he stood his ground. "Please, just call someone who can help. I really did find her wallet." He started to unzip his backpack. "Don't reach into that bag," the guard snapped, suddenly alert. "Look, kid, this scam's been tried before. Beat it." Jamie backed away, fighting tears of frustration. He'd come too far to give up now. He circled the perimeter of the set, looking for another entry point, another person who might believe him. After his third unsuccessful attempt with different security personnel, Jamie slumped onto a bench across from the set. His stomach ached with hunger, and he reluctantly ate his apple, watching crew members come and go through a side entrance. "You look lost," said a voice beside him. A young woman with a clipboard and a headset had sat down, eyeing him curiously. "I'm not lost," Jamie replied. "I'm just trying to return something important, but no one will listen." The woman, her badge read Zoe, production assistant, raised an eyebrow. "What are you trying to return?" Jamie hesitated, then decided honesty was his only option. "I found Meryl Streep's wallet in the park yesterday. It has her ID, credit cards, and everything. I just want to give it back." Zoe's expression shifted from skepticism to surprise. "Wait, are you serious? Ms. Streep mentioned losing her wallet yesterday. The production office has been making calls all morning." Jamie's heart leapt. "Yes, I found it under a bench in Westfield Park. I can prove it." He carefully unzipped his backpack and showed her just the edge of the wallet. Zoe studied him for a long moment. "Why didn't you just turn it into the police?" "I wanted to return it myself," Jamie admitted, "to make sure she got it back safely." Something in his earnest expression must have convinced her. "Wait here," Zoe said, standing up. "Don't move, okay? I'm going to talk to someone." Jamie nodded, hope rising for the first time that day. As Zoe disappeared through the side entrance, he checked his watch again. Nearly noon. Grandma would be worried. The minutes stretched into an hour. Crew members hurried past. The sun climbed higher, beating down on Jamie's head. Had Zoe forgotten him? Maybe security had escorted her away for even talking to him. Just as Jamie was considering his dwindling options, Zoe reappeared with an older man in a suit. "This is Daniel, Ms. Streep's personal assistant," Zoe explained. "He'd like to speak with you." Daniel's expression was guarded but not unkind. "Zoe tells me you found something belonging to Ms. Streep." Jamie nodded, carefully removing the wallet from his backpack. "I found this yesterday. Everything's still inside." Daniel took the wallet, opening it to examine the contents. His eyebrows rose slightly. "The cash is still here, all of it." "It's not my money," Jamie said simply. Daniel exchanged a look with Zoe. "Ms. Streep is filming right now, but she'll wrap in about an hour. Would you be willing to wait so she can thank you personally?" Jamie's heart raced. "Really? I can actually meet her." "I think she'd very much like to meet the honest young man." "Who returned her wallet?" Daniel said, his formal tone warming slightly. "There's a craft services table around the corner. Why don't you get something to eat while you wait?" The buffet table was like nothing Jamie had ever seen. Sandwiches, fruits, pastries, drinks of every kind. Under Zoe's encouraging nod, he filled a plate, trying not to appear too eager despite his gnawing hunger. "So what's your name?" Zoe asked as Jamie ate. "Jamie. Jamie Silver." "Well, Jamie Silver, that was a pretty remarkable thing you did. There's a lot of money in that wallet." Jamie shrugged. "My dad always said character is what you do when nobody's watching." "Your dad sounds like a wise man." "He was," Jamie said quietly. The afternoon crept by as Jamie waited, stomach full but nerves jangling. Grandma would be beside herself with worry by now, but he had no way to call her. Finally, as the autumn day began to fade into evening, Daniel reappeared. "She's ready to see you now." Jamie stood, brushing crumbs from his jacket, suddenly aware of every tear in his jeans, every scuff on his shoes. He followed Daniel toward the trailers, heart hammering against his ribs. What would he say to Meryl? "Streep?" What would she think of him? Maybe she'd just say a quick thank you and send him on his way. Daniel stopped at a trailer door and knocked softly. "Ms. Streep, the young man who found your wallet is here." The door opened, and there she was, Meryl Streep in person, still in costume from her role, her legendary presence somehow even more powerful up close. "So you're my wallet's rescuer," she said with a warm smile. "Please come in, I think we have a lot to talk about." Jamie hesitated at the trailer door, suddenly aware of the enormity of the moment. Inside was not just a famous actress, but an icon, someone whose films he and Grandma had watched countless times on their old TV. "Don't be shy," Meryl said, stepping aside to let him enter. "I won't bite." The trailer was warm and surprisingly cozy, with comfortable seating and a small table covered in script pages. Nothing like the extravagant space Jamie had imagined. "Please sit down," Meryl gestured to a small sofa. She was still in period costume, a beautiful 1940s dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of one of Grandma's favorite old movies. Up close, Jamie could see the fine lines around her eyes, the humanity behind the famous face. Jamie perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I'm Jamie Silver," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Jamie Silver, Daniel tells me you've done something quite extraordinary." Meryl sat across from him, her eyes kind but penetrating. "Not really," Jamie said. "I just returned what wasn't mine." Meryl smiled. "That may not seem extraordinary to you, but in my experience, integrity like yours is rare." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me how you found it." Jamie explained about collecting recyclables in the park, finding the wallet, and his decision to return it. He carefully omitted the part about how desperately they needed the money. "I didn't even realize it was missing," Meryl admitted. "I was so focused on this scene we've been shooting all day that I hadn't checked my bag." She shook her head. "I can't believe you came all this way." "It was important," Jamie said simply. Meryl studied him for a moment. "How old are you, Jamie?" 13. "And you traveled across the city alone to return this?" Her tone held a mixture of admiration and concern. Jamie nodded. "I had to miss school, but I figured this was more important." "Your parents must be worried. Sick about you." Jamie's gaze dropped to his worn sneakers. "My parents died 3 years ago. I live with my grandmother." A gentle silence filled the trailer. When Jamie looked up, Meryl's eyes held understanding rather than pity. "I'm very sorry to hear that," she said. "Your grandmother must be very proud of the young man she's raising." "She teaches me to do what's right," Jamie said, a small smile forming. "Even when it's hard." "She sounds like a remarkable woman. Does she know where you are today?" Jamie's smile faded. "She knows I was returning the wallet, but I've been gone much longer than I planned. She's probably really worried by—" Now Meryl immediately reached for her phone. "Let's call her. What's her number?" Jamie gave her their home number, and his heart raced as Meryl dialed. Would Grandma even believe who was calling? "Hello, Mrs. Silver? This is Meryl Streep calling." A pause. "Yes, that Meryl Streep." She smiled. At Jamie. "I'm calling about your grandson, Jamie. He's perfectly safe and with me right now." Another pause. "He returned my wallet that I lost with everything still inside. Yes, he is quite extraordinary." Jamie could hear his grandmother's excited voice on the other end, though not her exact words. "Of course, I understand your concern. I'd like to send him home in a car if that's acceptable to you." Meryl listened for a moment. "Actually, I was hoping to thank him properly. Would it be possible for me to treat both of you to dinner this evening?" Jamie's eyes widened in disbelief. "Wonderful," Meryl continued. "We'll pick Jamie up and come to get you in about an hour. Is that suitable?" She listened again. "It's truly my pleasure, Mrs. Silver. I look forward to meeting you." She ended the call and turned to Jamie, her eyes twinkling. "Your grandmother sounds delightful. She was quite concerned about you, but I think the idea of dinner helped ease her worry." Jamie was speechless. Dinner with Meryl Streep? It seemed impossible. "Now," Meryl said, reaching for her purse, "I'd like to give you a reward for your honesty." "No," Jamie said quickly, finding his voice. "I don't want a reward. It was the right thing to do." Meryl paused, studying him with newfound interest. "You know, most people would jump at the chance for a reward, especially—" She stopped herself. especially someone who looks like they need the money. Jamie finished for her, a hint of pride in his voice. That's not what I meant, Meryl said. Gently. It's okay, we do need the money, Jamie admitted. Grandma's medication is expensive, and since Dad and Mom died, things have been tough. But taking a reward for doing the right thing, it would change why I did it. Meryl set her purse aside, regarding Jamie with respect that made him sit a little straighter. Well then, no reward, she agreed. But dinner is non-negotiable. I insist. Jamie nodded, a smile breaking through. Grandma's going to be so excited, you're her favorite actress. We watch Out of Africa at least once a month. Does she now? Meryl's face lit up. I'll have to discuss that film with her. There are some wonderful stories from that set. Daniel knocked lightly before entering the trailer. The car is ready whenever you are, Ms. Streep. Thank you, Daniel. I think we're ready now. She turned to Jamie. Let's get you home to your grandmother first, and then we'll all go to dinner. I know a lovely little place where we won't be disturbed. As they walked to the waiting car, crew members paused their work to watch. Jamie could hear their whispers, wondering who this scruffy kid could be to warrant such attention from Meryl Streep. Ms. Streep, Jamie said as they settled into the back seat of the luxurious car. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you doing all this? The dinner and everything? I just returned your wallet. Meryl considered his question carefully. Do you know what I look for when I'm creating a character, Jamie? He shook his head. Authenticity. What makes a person real, their core truth. She smiled at him. In you, I see something authentic that's becoming increasingly rare. Pure integrity, without expectation of reward. That deserves recognition. The car made its way through evening traffic toward Jamie's neighborhood. As the buildings grew shabbier and the streets narrower, Jamie felt a flicker of embarrassment about where he lived. It's not much, he said, quietly as they approached his building. Home isn't about the building, Meryl replied. It's about the people and the love inside it. When they pulled up to the apartment building, Jamie was surprised to see his grandmother waiting outside, wearing her good dress and an expression of disbelieving excitement. Grandma! Jamie called, rushing to her side. You shouldn't be standing out here in the cold. Wild horses couldn't keep me inside when Meryl Streep is coming to visit, she replied, her eyes fixed on the figure emerging from the car. Meryl approached with a warm smile, extending her hand. Mrs. Silver, it's a pleasure to meet you. You've raised an extraordinary young man. Eleanor, please, Grandma said, clasping Meryl's hand in both of hers. And thank you, but Jamie came to us that way, full of goodness from the start. As Jamie watched his grandmother talking with Meryl Streep like they were old friends, he felt a strange sensation, like a door opening to a future he couldn't yet see, but somehow knew was bright with possibility. Shall we? Meryl gestured, toward the car. I've made reservations at a place I think you'll both enjoy. Walking between his grandmother and Meryl Streep, Jamie couldn't help but feel that something significant had shifted in his world. This morning, he had set out simply to return a wallet. Now, as evening fell, he was stepping into an unexpected chapter of his life, one that had begun with a simple choice to do what was right. The restaurant wasn't what Jamie had expected. Instead of some fancy place with white tablecloths and crystal chandeliers, Meryl had chosen a cozy Italian bistro tucked away on a side street. The owner, a round-faced man named Marco, greeted Meryl with the familiarity of an old friend, not a starstruck fan. My favorite table in the back is ready. For you, he said, leading them through the warmly lit dining room. A few patrons glanced up, doing double takes when they recognized Meryl, but thankfully no one approached. Jamie held his grandmother's arm, steadying her as they followed. Her breathing seemed more labored than usual, and he worried the days. Excitement might be too much for her. Are you okay? He whispered. Never better, she replied, squeezing his hand. The sparkle in her eyes told him she meant it. Their table was in a secluded corner with a small reserved sign. Marco pulled out chairs for both Eleanor and Meryl with a flourish, then winked at Jamie as the boy awkwardly seated himself. I've taken the liberty of ordering a few house specialties, Meryl explained, as fresh bread and olive oil appeared on the table. Marco's lasagna is legendary. Jamie watched in amazement as his grandmother engaged in easy conversation with Meryl Streep. discussing films from the 1970s, as if they were old friends catching up. Kramer versus Kramer was the first film of yours I ever saw, Eleanor said, breaking off a piece of bread. I remember thinking, this young woman is going to change the way stories are told. Meryl laughed. That's very kind. I was terrified during that entire production, so new to film, surrounded by these incredible actors. Yet you won an Oscar, Eleanor pointed out. Sometimes fear pushes us to our best work, Meryl replied. She turned to Jamie. What about you, Jamie? What films do you enjoy? Jamie hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. I like stories, he said finally. All kinds, really, but especially ones where ordinary people do extraordinary things. Meryl's eyes lit up. Those are the best stories, the ones that remind us of our capacity for greatness in small moments. A plate of antipasto arrived, and Jamie realized how hungry he was. He tried to remember his manners as he served his grandmother first, then himself. Jamie tells me you've been making films in our city, Eleanor said, skillfully changing the subject away from their circumstances. Yes, we're doing a historical drama set in the 1940s. It's about a female war correspondent who uncovers a story no one once told. Meryl's passion was evident as she described the project. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally. Jamie found himself relaxing, even sharing a few stories about school and his interest in photography, though he was careful not to mention that his camera was just an ancient smartphone with a cracked screen. It wasn't until the main course arrived, the promised lasagna, steam rising from its perfectly browned top, that Meryl gently steered the conversation toward their situation. Jamie mentioned you've been having some health challenges, Eleanor, she said carefully. Eleanor sighed, setting down her fork. Heart failure. Quite advanced, I'm afraid. The medications help, but... Jamie stared at his plate, his appetite suddenly gone. Grandma rarely spoke so directly about her condition, especially to strangers. I'm very sorry to hear that, Meryl said, her voice soft with genuine concern. Is there adequate treatment available? The treatment exists, Eleanor said with a small shrug. But on my fixed income, choices must be made. Rent or medication, utilities or doctor visits. She reached over to squeeze Jamie's hand. My priority has been keeping a roof over this young man's head. Jamie felt his throat tighten. Grandma takes care of me, he said. I try to help with the recycling money, but it's not much. And what happens, Meryl began delicately, with Jamie if I die? Eleanor finished frankly. My sister in Arizona would take him, but she has 4 children of her own and barely makes ends meet. She looked at Jamie with eyes full of love and worry. We're taking it one day at a time. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. Jamie felt exposed, vulnerable, their private struggles laid bare at this beautiful table with its cloth napkins and multiple forks. Tell me about Jamie's parents, Meryl said after a moment, changing the subject with graceful intuition. Eleanor's face softened. My son James was a cinematographer. Small independent films mostly, but he had such vision. His wife Claire was a teacher, literature. They met on a film set where she was consulting. Jamie looked up in surprise. His grandmother rarely spoke about his parents' work in such detail. A cinematographer. Meryl's interest was clearly piqued. What kind of projects did he work on? Documentaries, mostly, Eleanor continued. He believed in telling real stories about real people. His last project was following migrant workers through California's agricultural valleys. That explains Jamie's interest in storytelling, Meryl said thoughtfully. It's in his blood. Jamie felt a surge of pride. Dad used to let me hold his camera sometimes, he admitted. He said I had a good eye. He talked about teaching Jamie everything he knew, Eleanor added, her voice catching slightly. They had so many plans. The accident changed everything, Jamie said quietly. Meryl reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. I'm so sorry, Jamie. Losing parents is devastating at any age, but especially young. The arrival of dessert, tiramisu and cannoli, lightened the mood somewhat. Jamie couldn't help smiling at his grandmother's delight as she took her first bite of the sweet treat. Now, Meryl said, setting down her coffee cup. "I have a confession to make." Both Jamie and Eleanor looked at her curiously. "When I choose a restaurant, it's rarely random," she explained. "Marco's son is a cardiologist at University Hospital." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "Is that so?" "One of the best in the city," Meryl continued. "I took the liberty of asking if he might be willing to review your case. With your permission, of course." Jamie felt a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. "Really?" "He's agreed to see you next week," Meryl said to Eleanor. "No charge, just a professional courtesy." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "That's extraordinarily kind, but I couldn't—" "Please," Meryl interrupted gently. "Consider it a thank you for raising such an exceptional young man." As they finished their meal, Jamie noticed his grandmother looking tired, the excitement of the evening taking its toll. "We should probably get Grandma home soon," he said reluctantly. Meryl nodded in understanding. "Of course, but before we go, I have one more question for you, Jamie." "Yes?" "Your grandmother mentioned your father was a cinematographer. Did you inherit his interest in filmmaking?" Jamie hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. "I love it. I try to practice with my phone camera, even though the screen is cracked. Sometimes I make little videos of birds in the park or people walking downtown." He shrugged. "Nothing special." Something shifted in Meryl's expression. A spark of recognition, perhaps, or an idea taking shape. "I'd love to see your work sometime," she said. Jamie blushed. "It's not really work. Just playing around." "All great art begins as play," Meryl replied with a smile. "The best filmmakers never lose that sense of exploration." As they drove back to Jamie's apartment, the car filled with comfortable silence. Eleanor dozed lightly against Jamie's shoulder, and he noticed Meryl watching them with a thoughtful expression. When they arrived, Meryl insisted on helping Eleanor up to the apartment. Jamie felt a momentary flash of embarrassment as he unlocked the door to their small, shabby home, but Meryl showed no reaction to the peeling paint or worn furniture. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Eleanor said, squeezing Meryl's hand. "It's been the brightest spot in a long while." "The pleasure was entirely mine," Meryl replied. "I'll have Daniel call you about that doctor's appointment." As Meryl turned to leave, she handed Jamie a business card. "My direct number," she said quietly. "I meant what I said about seeing your work." Jamie stared at the card, stunned. "Thank you, Ms. Streep." "Meryl," she corrected with a warm smile. "I think we're past formalities now." After she left, Jamie helped his grandmother to bed, making sure she took her evening medication. "What an extraordinary day," Eleanor murmured sleepily. "Do you think we'll ever see her again?" Jamie asked. Eleanor smiled, her eyes already closing. "Something tells me this is just the beginning." Jamie tucked the blanket around her shoulders, then went to the window, watching as the elegant car pulled away from their building. In his hand, he still clutched Meryl's card, a tangible connection to a world he'd only glimpsed. For the first time in a long time, Jamie fell asleep that night, thinking not about what they lacked, but about what might be possible. Jamie's alarm blared at 6:30 a.m. as usual. He reached over to silence it, mentally preparing for another school day. The events of yesterday seemed like a dream, finding the wallet, meeting Meryl Streep, the dinner at Marco's. Only the business card on his nightstand proved it had been real. He made breakfast for his grandmother, toast and tea all they had left until his next recycling run, and laid out her morning pills. "You'll be late if you don't hurry," Eleanor said, watching him fuss over her. "I'm perfectly capable of taking my own medication." "I know," Jamie replied, gathering his school books, "just making sure." The knock at their door came just as Jamie was shouldering his backpack. He froze, exchanging a confused look with his grandmother. "Are you expecting anyone?" he asked. Eleanor shook her head. Jamie approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. His breath caught. "It's her," he whispered. "It's Meryl." He fumbled with the locks, suddenly conscious of his worn school uniform and the apartment's shabby appearance in the morning light. When he opened the door, Meryl Streep stood there in casual clothes, jeans and a simple sweater, looking nothing. Like a famous actress and somehow more approachable because of it. Beside her stood Daniel, her assistant, holding what appeared to be a garment bag. "Good morning," Meryl said brightly. I hope we're not too early. Jamie stared, momentarily speechless. Early for what? For our set visit, of course. Meryl smiled at his confusion. Unless you've changed your mind. Set visit, Jamie repeated. I thought you might enjoy seeing how a film is made, Meryl explained, given your interest in cinematography. She glanced at his school uniform. But I see you have school. Perhaps another day would be better. No, Jamie said quickly, then composed himself. I mean, yes, I would love to visit the set. But I have school and Grandma... Jamie, Eleanor called from her chair. Invite our guests in, please. Meryl and Daniel stepped inside, and Jamie made hasty introductions. Mrs. Silver, Meryl said warmly, I hope you're feeling better this morning. Much better, thank you, Eleanor replied. And please, it's Eleanor. Meryl turned back to Jamie. I should have called first. I just thought... She hesitated. After our conversation last night, I spoke with our director about your father's work and your interest in filmmaking. He's shooting a particularly technical scene today and thought it might be educational. Jamie's heart raced with excitement, but reality quickly tempered it. I can't miss school. I'm already on thin ice for yesterday's absence. I took the liberty of contacting your school, Daniel interjected, pulling an envelope from his jacket. This is a formal invitation for an educational set visit and mentorship day. They were quite accommodating once they understood the opportunity. Jamie looked to his grandmother, hardly daring to hope. Eleanor nodded. You should go, she said. Simply, but what about you? Jamie asked. I'll be fine for one day, she assured him. Mrs. Patel from downstairs already offered to look in on me. She's been dying for an excuse to share her samosas. And I've arranged for a home health nurse to visit midday, Meryl added. Just as a precaution, Jamie was overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of these arrangements. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Meryl suggested with a smile. Yes, Jamie breathed. Absolutely yes. Excellent, Meryl clapped her hands together. Daniel has brought some appropriate attire. Film sets have certain safety requirements. Daniel handed Jamie the garment bag. Inside was a set of new clothes, jeans, a button-up shirt and a sturdy jacket, all in his size. These are brand new, Jamie said, fingering the price tag still attached. Wardrobe always keeps extras on hand, Meryl explained smoothly. You'll blend right in. Jamie changed quickly in his small bedroom, marveling at how perfectly everything fit. The new clothes felt strange against his skin, no worn patches or stretched-out areas. When he emerged, Meryl nodded approvingly. Perfect. Ready to go? After kissing his grandmother goodbye and extracting multiple promises from her to rest, Jamie followed Meryl down to the waiting car. Is this really happening? He asked, as they pulled away from the curb. Meryl laughed. It really is. The ride to Providence Square was filled with Meryl explaining the scene they would be shooting that day, a complex sequence involving a confrontation between her character, a war correspondent, and government officials trying to suppress her. Story. The technical aspects are what make it challenging, she explained. Multiple camera setups, precise timing, and emotional continuity across different shots. Jamie absorbed every word, asking questions that made Meryl raise her eyebrows in surprise at his knowledge. You really have been studying film, she remarked. Jamie shrugged. YouTube tutorials mostly, and Dad's old books. When they arrived at the set, everything was different from yesterday. Jamie was no longer an outsider trying to get in, but a guest of the star. Crew members nodded respectfully as Meryl introduced him. This is Jamie Silver, she told the director, a bearded man named Thomas, the young cinematographer I mentioned. Jamie blushed at the description, but straightened his shoulders, determined to live up to it. Your father was James Silver? Thomas asked, shaking Jamie's hand with genuine interest. Jamie nodded, surprised. You knew him? We worked together. On a short film years ago. Brilliant eye. I was sorry to hear about the accident. Thomas gestured around the busy set. Let me show you how we've set up today's sequence. For the next hour, Jamie followed Thomas around the set, absorbing every detail of the camera placements, lighting setups, and technical considerations. He recognized some of the equipment from his father's books and videos he'd studied, but seeing it in action was entirely different. Would you like to watch from the monitor? Thomas offered as they prepared to shoot. Jamie nodded eagerly, following him to a cluster of screens showing different camera angles. The first take was fascinating. Meryl, transformed completely into her character, her posture and voice changing subtly but distinctly. Jamie watched in awe as she delivered a powerful monologue about truth and courage. Between takes, Meryl introduced Jamie to the cinematographer, a woman named Sophia, who showed him how she collaborated with the director to achieve specific visual effects. "You have questions in your eyes," Sophia observed. "Ask them." Jamie hesitated only briefly before pointing to one of the camera setups. "Wouldn't it be more effective if that camera was lower? It would make the government officials look more imposing when they stand over her." Sophia studied the setup, then looked back at Jamie with new interest. "You know, you're absolutely right," she called to her camera operator. "Let's try a lower angle on camera 3. The next take incorporated Jamie's suggestion, and the difference was immediately apparent. The scene gained tension and visual impact. "Good eye," Thomas commented, glancing at Jamie with newfound respect. By lunchtime, Jamie had made several more observations that the crew implemented. He sat at a table with Meryl, Thomas, and Sophia, listening to their discussion of the afternoon's shooting schedule. "What do you think about this scene, Jamie?" Thomas asked suddenly, sliding the script toward him. "Too heavy-handed?" Jamie read the page carefully, aware that everyone was watching him. "I think," he began cautiously, "the dialogue tells us she's afraid, but wouldn't it be stronger to just see it in her eyes? My dad always said the most powerful moments on film are often silent." A beat of silence followed, then Thomas laughed. "James Silver's son, indeed. That's exactly what your father would have said." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Jamie was no longer just observing but participating, fetching equipment, helping the script supervisor track continuity, even operating the slate for one scene. Near the end of the day, as they were preparing for the final setup, a technical problem arose with one of the monitors. The crew scrambled to fix it while Thomas paced anxiously, aware of the fading daylight. "What about the backup system?" Jamie suggested, remembering something he'd overheard earlier. Thomas snapped his fingers. "Perfect. Get the portable monitor set up." The solution worked, and they completed the scene just as the sun was setting. Thomas approached Jamie as the crew began packing up equipment. "You've got a natural instinct for this," he said, "and not just because of your father. You see things differently, that's rare." Jamie felt a warmth spread through his chest at the praise. On the ride back to his apartment, Jamie couldn't stop smiling. "Thank you," he said to Meryl. "That was the best day of my life." Meryl studied him thoughtfully. "You know, we're going to be filming for another 3 weeks. We could use someone with your eye around the set." Jamie's heart nearly stopped. "What do you mean?" "An internship of sorts," Meryl explained. "After school and on weekends. Paid, of course." "Paid?" Jamie repeated, stunned. "Everyone on a film. Set earns their way," Meryl said firmly. "Even interns, especially ones with valuable contributions." Jamie thought of the overdue rent, his grandmother's medication, the empty refrigerator. "Yes," he said, "yes, please." As they pulled up to his building, Meryl handed him an envelope. "Your first day's pay, you earned it." Inside was more money than Jamie had ever held at once. "Tomorrow after school?" Meryl asked. Jamie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Good," she said with a smile. "I think this is the beginning of something important for both of us." 2 weeks into Jamie's internship, his world had transformed. After school, each day, he hurried to the film set where he was gradually taking on more responsibilities. Weekends were spent entirely on location, absorbing everything he could about filmmaking. The crew had accepted him as one of their own, nicknaming him Mini DP, after he'd offered a lighting suggestion that had impressed even the most veteran technicians. Best of all, the money he earned meant real food in the refrigerator, on time, rent payments, and his grandmother's full prescription regimen. Eleanor seemed stronger already, her color improved, her breathing less labored. "You look tired," she remarked one morning as Jamie gulped down breakfast before school. "Perhaps you should take a day off." "I'm fine," Jamie insisted, though the dark circles under his eyes suggested otherwise. Balancing school, the internship, and his grandmother's care was taking its toll. You're 13, not 30, Eleanor reminded him gently. You need proper rest. Jamie kissed her forehead. I'll rest when the film wraps. Only one more week of shooting. The apartment phone rang, an unusual occurrence this early. Jamie answered, to find Daniel, Meryl's assistant, on the line. Jamie, Ms. Streep asked me to call. Today's shooting schedule has changed. They need you on set right after school for an important scene. I'll be there, Jamie promised. At school he struggled to focus, his mind constantly drifting to the upcoming scene, a pivotal confrontation they'd been building toward all week. His math teacher called on him twice before he registered his name. Mr. Silver, perhaps you'd like to share what's so much more interesting than quadratic equations. The class snickered as Jamie fumbled for an answer. Sorry, Ms. Porter, it won't happen again. When the final bell rang, Jamie raced to his locker, only to find the school counselor, Mr. Beckman, waiting for him. Jamie, could you spare a few? Some minutes, he asked, his expression serious. Jamie glanced at his watch. I'm really sorry, but I'm late for... This won't take long, Mr. Beckman interrupted, ushering Jamie toward his office. Reluctantly, Jamie followed, sending a quick text to Sophia letting her know he might be delayed. Mr. Beckman gestured to a chair. Jamie, several of your teachers have expressed concern about recent changes in your performance. I've been busy, Jamie admitted, but my grades are still okay. It's not just grades, Mr. Beckman said. You're distracted, tired, and Mrs. Porter says you fell asleep in class yesterday. Jamie shifted uncomfortably. I was up late studying. Mr. Beckman gave him a knowing look. We know about your internship, Jamie. While it's an extraordinary opportunity, your education must come first. It's only for another week, Jamie protested. There's something else, Mr. Beckman continued. The school nurse visited your grandmother yesterday. Jamie stiffened. Why? Standard wellness check for guardians of students in our assistance program. Mr. Beckman leaned forward. She reported your grandmother was alone and appeared quite unwell. She has good days and bad days, Jamie said defensively. Jamie, Mr. Beckman's voice softened. Who stays with your grandmother while you're at school in this internship? The question hit Jamie like a physical blow. Mrs. Patel from downstairs checks on her, and I'm arranging for a home health aide soon. The last part wasn't exactly true yet, but he was planning to use his next paycheck for that very purpose. See? Mr. Beckman made a note in his file. Well, I'll be following up on that. In the meantime, perhaps it would be best to reduce your internship hours. I can't, Jamie said quickly. They're counting on me. Mr. Beckman's expression turned grave. Then we may need to discuss alternative arrangements for your care and your grandmother's. The implication was clear. Jamie felt a chill run through him. What does that mean? It means that if your grandmother cannot adequately care for you, and you cannot adequately care for her, social services may need to intervene. No, Jamie shook his head vehemently. We're doing fine, better than ever, actually. Mr. Beckman sighed. Jamie, I know this internship seems like an amazing opportunity, and it is. But you're 13 years old. Your welfare comes first. Jamie left the meeting with a hollow feeling in his stomach. He'd been given an ultimatum: provide proof of proper care arrangements for his grandmother by Monday, or Mr. Beckman would be obligated to make a report. By the time Jamie arrived at the set, they were already well into shooting. Sophia spotted him and waved him over to the monitors. There you are, she whispered. Everything okay? Jamie nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He focused intently. On the scene, pushing away his worry for a few precious hours. When they finished for the day, Meryl found him coiling cables with the grip department. You were late today, she observed, not accusingly. School counselor, Jamie said tersely. Something in his tone made Meryl study him more carefully. Walk with me to my trailer? I could use your feedback on tomorrow's scene. Once inside her trailer, Meryl gestured for Jamie to sit. What happened with the counselor? The genuine concern in her voice broke through Jamie's defenses. Words poured out as he explained the ultimatum, his fear of being separated from his grandmother, and the impossible choice he now faced. I can't give up the internship, he concluded. We need the money for Grandma's care. But if I don't, they might take me away from her anyway. Meryl listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. When Jamie finished, she asked, What does your grandmother say about all this? I haven't told her, Jamie admitted. She'll just worry or worse, insist I quit the internship. She might be right, Meryl said gently. Jamie stared at her in disbelief. But you're the one who offered me this opportunity. An opportunity, yes, not an obligation. Meryl leaned forward. Jamie, I've watched you these past 2 weeks. You have remarkable talent and work ethic, but you're exhausting yourself trying to be both a professional and a caretaker. I don't have a choice, Jamie said, his voice breaking slightly. Everyone has choices, Meryl replied. Sometimes they're just difficult ones. Jamie's phone rang, the apartment's landline. His heart raced as he answered. Jamie? It was Mrs. Patel, her voice urgent. You must come home. Your grandmother collapsed. The ambulance is coming. The world seemed to tilt beneath Jamie's feet. I'm on my way. Meryl was already grabbing her keys. I'll drive you. The ride to Jamie's apartment was the longest of his life. When they arrived, paramedics were already loading Eleanor into an ambulance. She looked so small on the stretcher, an oxygen mask covering her face. Grandma! Jamie rushed to her side. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. She tried to speak but couldn't manage more than a wheeze. Are you family? A paramedic asked. I'm her grandson, Jamie said. I'm all she has. You can ride with us to the hospital, the paramedic said, helping Jamie into the ambulance. As the doors closed, Jamie caught a glimpse of Meryl speaking intently to another paramedic, her expression determined. At the hospital, everything was a blur of forms, questions, and sterile waiting rooms. Jamie sat alone, his school bag still slung over his shoulder, feeling smaller with each passing minute. Hours later, a doctor finally approached. Jamie Silver, I'm Dr. Harris, your grandmother's cardiologist. Is she going to be okay? Jamie asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Harris sat beside him. Your grandmother has experienced severe heart failure. We've stabilized her, but I won't sugarcoat this. Her condition is serious. Jamie fought back tears. Can I see her? Briefly. She's resting now. In the ICU, Jamie barely recognized his grandmother among the tubes and monitors. He took her frail hand, careful not to disturb the IV. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have been there. A nurse touched his shoulder gently. You can stay for 5 more minutes. Then you'll need to go to the waiting room. But where will I go after that? Jamie asked. I can't go home alone. The nurse looked uncomfortable. I'll check with social services. As she left, the realization hit Jamie fully. He might not be allowed to return home at all. Without his grandmother, there was no one to care for him. He was alone. The weight of it crushed down on him, and for the first time since his parents' funeral, Jamie Silver put his head down and sobbed. Jamie startled awake to the sound of hushed voices. He had fallen asleep in the hospital waiting room, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Blinking in the harsh fluorescent light, he saw Meryl deep in conversation with a doctor and a woman in a business suit. He's awake, the woman noticed, gesturing toward Jamie. Meryl turned, her face softening with relief. She came to sit beside him, putting a gentle hand on his shoulder. How are you holding up? How's Grandma? Jamie asked immediately, ignoring. So the question. Stable, Meryl said. Dr. Harris says the new medication is helping. The woman in the business suit approached, extending her hand. Hello, Jamie. I'm Linda Reeves from Child Protective Services. I understand you've been in a difficult situation. Jamie tensed, looking warily between her and Meryl. Are you going to take me away from Grandma? Linda's expression was carefully neutral. Right now, we're just trying to determine the best temporary arrangement while your grandmother recovers. I can take care of myself, Jamie insisted. I have been for years. Jamie, Meryl interjected gently, Ms. Reeves and I have been discussing options. With your grandmother's permission, we've come up with a solution that might work for everyone. Hope flickered in Jamie's chest. What kind of solution? Meryl glanced at Linda, who nodded encouragingly. I've offered to act as your temporary guardian while your grandmother is in the hospital. Jamie stared at her in disbelief. You want me to stay with you? In the guest house on my property, Meryl clarified. It's close enough to the hospital that you can visit Eleanor daily and to your school so you won't fall behind. But Jamie struggled to process this unexpected development. What about the film? We'll finish the shoot on schedule, Meryl said. You can still help when you're not in school, but your hours will be more reasonable. Linda added, this would be a formal temporary guardianship with court approval. Your grandmother has already given her preliminary consent, provided you agree. Jamie felt dizzy with the implications. Can I see her, Grandma? I need to talk to her first. Dr. Harris, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward. She's awake now, you can have a few minutes. In the ICU, Eleanor looked marginally better than the night before. Some color had returned to her cheeks, though she still appeared terribly fragile among the medical equipment. Jamie, she whispered, reaching for his hand. My brave boy. Grandma, they want me to stay with Ms. Streep while you're in the hospital, Jamie said, the words tumbling out. I don't want to leave you. Eleanor squeezed his hand weakly. Listen to me, Jamie. This is a blessing, not a punishment. Meryl has offered you safe harbor during a storm. But what if you... Jamie couldn't finish the thought. If I get worse, Eleanor said directly, would you rather be in a foster home? With strangers or with someone who already cares about you? Put that way, the answer was obvious. Jamie nodded reluctantly. Meryl Streep, Eleanor marveled softly. Of all the wallets in the world, you found hers. She smiled faintly. Your parents are watching over you, Jamie, I feel it. Later that afternoon, Jamie found himself being driven to Meryl's home, a beautiful old Victorian house set on several acres outside the city. The guest house turned out to be a charming cottage nearby, fully furnished and stocked with everything he might need. I hope it will be comfortable, Meryl said, showing him around. I've arranged for a tutor to help you catch up on schoolwork, and Daniel will drive you to visit your grandmother every day after school. Jamie stood in the center of the cottage, overwhelmed by the kindness, yet feeling strangely hollow. Why are you doing all this? Meryl considered the question carefully. When I was not much older than you, someone helped me when I needed it most. They saw something in me worth nurturing, worth fighting for. She looked directly at Jamie. I see that same something in you. The days that followed established a new rhythm. Mornings meant school, where Jamie worked diligently to make up for his previous distraction. Afternoons began with hospital visits to his grandmother, whose improvement was slow but steady. Evenings often found him on set for a few carefully monitored hours, or at the cottage reviewing dailies with Sophia, who had taken a special interest in mentoring him. One weekend, Sophia brought over a professional camera. Thomas thought you might like to experiment with this, she explained, showing Jamie how to operate it. We're not using it for the current production. Jamie's hands trembled as he held the camera, the same model his father had used. This is too valuable, he protested. Art requires proper tools, Sophia replied simply. Besides, what good is equipment sitting in storage? With the camera, Jamie began documenting his daily visits to the hospital, capturing the subtle signs of his grandmother's recovery. The first day she sat up without assistance. The morning a nurse removed one of the monitors. The afternoon she managed to eat an entire bowl of soup. You're creating a recovery journal, Dr. Harris observed, watching Jamie film Eleanor's physical therapy session. It helps me see the progress, Jamie explained. Some days it feels like nothing's changing, but when I look at the footage from last week, I can see how far she's come. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. That's wisdom beyond your years. 3 weeks into this new arrangement, Meryl invited Jamie to dinner at the main house, where she had assembled Thomas, Sophia, and several other key members of the production team. We have something to discuss with you, Meryl said after the meal as they gathered in her comfortable living room. The principal photography for the film ends tomorrow. Jamie nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. The end of filming meant the end of his internship, which had become much more than just a job. However, Thomas continued, post-production is just beginning. Sophia and I have been reviewing your footage of your grandmother's recovery. Jamie looked up in surprise. My footage? Why? Sophia leaned forward. Because it's extraordinary, Jamie. You've captured something raw and beautiful in those quiet hospital moments. The composition, the emotional honesty, it's remarkable work. We'd like to offer you a continued internship during post-production, Thomas said. Specifically, we want you to develop your recovery footage into a short documentary under Sophia's guidance. Jamie could hardly believe what he was hearing. A real documentary of my own? Your father would be proud, Sophia said softly. This is exactly the kind of intimate, honest storytelling he was known for. That night, Jamie couldn't sleep. He sat on the cottage porch, looking up at the stars, thinking about how much had changed in just a few weeks. His grandmother was getting better. He was learning his father's craft from industry professionals. For the first time since his parents' death, he felt a sense of purpose, of forward momentum. The next morning, Jamie brought his camera to the hospital as usual. Eleanor was sitting in a chair beside her bed, looking stronger than she had in months. The doctor says I might go home next week, she announced as Jamie set up his tripod. With proper home care, of course. Jamie's heart leapt at the news. That's amazing, Grandma. Come sit, she patted the chair beside her. Tell me about your film project. Sophia called me yesterday. Jamie explained the documentary concept, his excitement building as he described his vision. Halfway through, he realized his grandmother was watching him with tears in her eyes. What's wrong? He asked, alarmed. Are you in pain? Eleanor shook her head. I'm looking at your father, she said softly. The same passion in your eyes, the same fire when you talk about telling stories that matter. Jamie swallowed hard against the sudden lump in his throat. I miss him. And Mom too. They're still with you, Eleanor said. In your talent, your compassion, your determination. She touched his cheek gently, and in the unexpected angels who appear just when we need them most. As Jamie left the hospital that afternoon, he paused to film the sunset from the parking lot, the golden light, transforming the ordinary scene into something hopeful and new. Through the viewfinder, the world looked different, full of stories waiting to be told. For the first time since finding Meryl's wallet, Jamie felt not just gratitude for the opportunities it had brought, but a growing confidence in his ability to make something meaningful from them. This wasn't just about surviving anymore, this was about becoming. Jamie's documentary was taking shape beautifully. 6 weeks of careful editing under Sophia's guidance had transformed his raw hospital footage into something powerful and deeply personal. He titled it The Waiting Room, capturing not just his grandmother's recovery, but the universal experience of patients and families caught in medical limbo, hoping, waiting, enduring. We should submit this to the Young Filmmakers Festival, Sophia suggested one afternoon as they reviewed the latest cut. The deadline is next week. Jamie hesitated. Do you really think it's good enough? It's more than good enough, Sophia assured him. It's exceptional. At home, Eleanor continued to improve under the care of a part-time nurse Meryl had arranged. She'd been discharged from the hospital 3 weeks earlier, returning to their apartment which had been modified with medical equipment and safety features. Jamie split his time between the apartment and Meryl's guest house, maintaining his formal temporary guardianship arrangement while his grandmother regained her strength. Life had found a new, promising rhythm until the letter arrived. Jamie recognized the official social services letterhead immediately. He waited until his grandmother was napping before carefully opening it, his hands trembling slightly. The first paragraph made his stomach drop. Petition for permanent guardianship. Evaluation. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the message was clear enough. Despite Eleanor's improvement, questions remained about her long-term ability to care for Jamie. The temporary guardianship with Meryl was scheduled for review, with the possibility of more permanent arrangements being considered. A court date had been set for the following month. Jamie slipped the letter into his backpack before his grandmother could see it. This would only worry her, potentially setting back her recovery. Better to handle it himself somehow. That evening at Meryl's house, where he was staying while his grandmother had physical therapy, Jamie found himself unable to focus on the editing sessions Sophia had scheduled. What's bothering you? Sophia asked, noticing his distraction. You've read the same email 3 times. Jamie hesitated, then pulled out the letter. Sophia read it carefully, her expression growing concerned. Have you shown this to Meryl? She asked. Jamie shook his head. She's already done so much. I can't keep asking for more. This isn't asking, Sophia said firmly. This is letting her help with something she's already committed to. She picked up her phone. I'm texting her now. 30 minutes later, Meryl arrived home from a meeting, coming directly to the editing suite they'd set up in her study. Let me see the letter, she said, without preamble. After reading it twice, Meryl looked up with a determined expression. I've been expecting something like this. The temporary arrangement was always going to face scrutiny. What happens now? Jamie asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Now we fight, Meryl said simply. I'll call my attorney tonight. The following day, Jamie visited his grandmother as usual, carefully maintaining his composure despite his inner turmoil. As they sat together reviewing his latest editing work on a laptop, Eleanor studied him over her reading glasses. Something's troubling you, she observed. Is it the documentary? No, the documentary's fine, Jamie assured her. Sophia thinks we should submit it to a festival. That's wonderful news, Eleanor said. So what's casting that shadow over your eyes? Jamie sighed. His grandmother had always been able to read him too well. There's a hearing next month about the guardianship situation. Eleanor's expression grew serious. I see. I didn't want to worry you, Jamie said quickly. Meryl's already talking to her lawyer. Of course she is, Eleanor said with a small smile. But Jamie, we need to be realistic about what might happen. Jamie's throat tightened. What do you mean? Eleanor took his hand. My health is improving. But I'm not young anymore. This heart condition isn't going away. She squeezed his fingers. We need to consider what's best for your future, no matter what. Being with you is what's best for me, Jamie insisted. Perhaps, Eleanor said gently, but there may come a time when that's not possible. Later that week, Jamie met with Meryl's attorney, a kind but direct woman named Catherine Martinez who specialized in family law. She didn't sugarcoat the situation. The court will be concerned primarily with Jamie's stability and well-being, she explained. While Eleanor's health has improved, her age and medical condition create uncertainty that the court may find problematic. She's all the family I have, Jamie said, his voice breaking slightly. I understand, Catherine replied, but we need to prepare for all possibilities. That night, Jamie couldn't sleep. He slipped out of the guest house and walked the grounds of Meryl's property, eventually sitting on a garden bench beneath the stars. The weight of potential loss pressed down on him, losing his grandmother, his home, the fragile sense of belonging he'd begun to rebuild. Mind if I join you? Meryl's voice came softly from behind. Jamie nodded, making room on the bench. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the night sky. I was 9 when I decided to become an actress, Meryl said finally. My mother thought it was just a phase. My father worried it wasn't practical. But there was a teacher who believed in me, Mrs. Cartwright. She drove me to auditions, helped me prepare monologues, fought for me when others wouldn't. Jamie listened, curious about the connection. She wasn't family by blood, Meryl continued, but she became family by choice, by belief. She turned to Jamie. Family isn't always defined by legal documents or shared DNA. But Grandma is my family, Jamie said. Yes, she is, Meryl agreed, and nothing will change that no matter what the court decides. The next day brought another complication. Mr. Beckman called from school to inform Jamie that his recent absences, even those excused for the film internship, had put him in danger of not advancing to the next grade. The school board requires a minimum attendance record, he explained. You'll need to make up significant coursework to meet graduation requirements. The documentary deadline loomed just days away, requiring intensive editing hours. Caught between his academic obligations and his passion project, Jamie felt stretched to breaking point. That evening, disaster struck. While transferring files at the apartment, Jamie's hard drive, containing all his documentary footage, crashed. The backup was incomplete, missing the most recent interviews and crucial hospital sequences. It's fixable, Sophia assured him over the phone. We can recover most of the data, but it will take time, possibly past the festival deadline. Jamie set the phone down, fighting tears of frustration. The documentary wasn't just a film project anymore. It had become his testimony to his grandmother's strength, his processing of the fear and hope of the past months, his connection to his father's legacy. When Meryl arrived at the apartment to pick him up, she found Jamie sitting amid scattered equipment, his face drawn with exhaustion and defeat. "I can't do it all," he admitted. "School, the documentary, the guardianship hearing, it's too much." Meryl sat beside him on the floor. "Then don't do it all at once. Some things can wait. The festival deadline." "There will be other festivals," Meryl interrupted gently. "Your education and your grandmother need to come first right now." "But the film means so much to me," Jamie said, his voice cracking. "It's the only thing that's really mine in all of this." Meryl was quiet for a moment. "What does the documentary mean to you, Jamie?" "At its heart," Jamie thought carefully, "it's about waiting for life to continue when everything is paused, about finding hope in small moments of progress." He looked up at her. "It's about my family, the one I lost and the one I'm trying to keep." "Then it's worth doing right," Meryl said, "even if that means waiting for the next deadline." As they gathered the equipment to leave, Eleanor called Jamie to her bedside. "I've been thinking about our situation," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I want to speak at the hearing." "Grandma, you don't have to—" "I do," she interrupted firmly, "because I need to tell them something important. That family is not about who can care for whom. It's about who belongs together." She took Jamie's hand. "And whatever happens, we belong together, one way or another." As Jamie left the apartment that night, he felt both the weight of uncertainty and the strength of connection. The path ahead remained unclear, but for the first time he understood that family, true family, could weather even the most threatening storms. The courtroom felt impossibly large to Jamie as he sat between his grandmother and Meryl, waiting for the hearing to begin. Catherine Martinez arranged papers at their table, occasionally offering reassuring smiles. Across the aisle, a stern-faced woman from social services reviewed a thick file, Jamie's life reduced to reports and evaluations. "All rise," the clerk announced as the judge entered. Judge Harriet Chen was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with shrewd eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Case number 247B, regarding the guardianship of minor Jamie Silver," she announced, settling behind the bench. "Let's begin." The social services representative spoke first, outlining Eleanor's health challenges and Jamie's interrupted education. She emphasized the unstable nature of their living situation and Eleanor's advanced age and precarious health. Her recommendation was clear. Eleanor was no longer capable of being Jamie's primary guardian. Catherine countered by presenting Eleanor's medical records, showing her steady improvement under proper care. She then called Dr. Harris to testify. "Mrs. Silver's condition has stabilized remarkably," the cardiologist explained. "With continued medication and monitoring, she could maintain this level of health for years." "But you cannot guarantee there won't be future episodes?" the judge asked directly. "In medicine, Your Honor, we rarely deal in guarantees," Dr. Harris replied. "But I can state professionally that with proper support systems in place, Eleanor Silver is capable of fulfilling her role as guardian." The phrase "proper support systems" became the hearing's focus. Catherine outlined a comprehensive plan that included home health assistance, continued medical monitoring, and a system for Jamie's care during any health emergencies, all underwritten by a special fund Meryl had established. While Mrs. Streep's generosity is commendable, the social services representative argued, we must consider the long-term stability of such arrangements. Celebrity involvement tends to be temporary. At this, Meryl requested permission to address the court. Judge Chen nodded her approval. "Your Honor," Meryl began, "my commitment to Jamie and his grandmother is not a fleeting interest or publicity stunt. It stems from a recognition of Jamie's extraordinary character and potential, and his undeniable bond with his grandmother." She spoke with the same conviction that had won her 3 Academy Awards. "What I'm proposing isn't charity, but investment in a young filmmaker whose talent deserves nurturing in a family that deserves to stay together." The judge listened attentively, her expression revealing nothing. "And if your professional obligations take you elsewhere, film projects around the world, the financial arrangements will continue regardless of my location," Meryl answered. and I've established a local support network of professionals who will remain available." Jamie listened, amazed at the detailed planning that had gone into protecting his future with his grandmother. When his turn came to speak, he approached the witness stand with knees that threatened to buckle. "Jamie," Judge Chen said kindly, "I'd like to hear from you directly. Where do you want to live?" Jamie took a deep breath. "With my grandmother, Your Honor. She's my only family." He paused, then corrected himself. "My only blood family. But I've learned family can be bigger than that." "How so?" the judge prompted. "When I found Miss Streep's wallet, I was just trying to do the right thing. I never expected everything that followed." Jamie gestured toward Meryl. "She didn't have to help us, but she chose to. She became part of our family by choice." The judge nodded, thoughtfully. "And your education?" "Your social worker reports concerns about absences and falling grades. I've been catching up," Jamie explained. "The tutor Ms. Streep arranged has helped me get back on track. My latest progress report shows I'm now above grade level in most subjects." Catherine submitted his updated academic records as evidence. Finally, Helen took the stand, moving slowly but purposefully to the witness chair. Despite her frail appearance, her voice rang clear. "Your Honor, I understand the concerns about my health. I share them. There's nothing I want more than for Jamie to be safe and cared for." She looked directly at the judge. "But I also know that at 13, he needs more than physical security. He needs the one person who shares his memories of his parents, who knows the stories of where he comes from." Eleanor's voice wavered slightly. "We've been offered a miracle, support that allows us to stay together while ensuring Jamie's needs are met. I'm asking this court to recognize that the best place for my grandson is with me, with the help we've been blessed to receive." After final arguments, Judge Chen called a 30-minute recess to review all evidence before making her decision. Those 30 minutes stretched like hours, as Jamie sat silently between the two women who had fought so hard for him. When court resumed, Judge Chen delivered her ruling with thoughtful precision. "This court's primary concern is the welfare of Jamie Silver," she began. "While I appreciate the social services recommendation, I find that separating Jamie from his grandmother would cause significant emotional harm that outweighs potential benefits of alternative placement." Jamie felt Eleanor's hand tighten around his. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I'm approving a modified guardianship arrangement. Mrs. Eleanor Silver will remain Jamie's primary guardian, with Ms. Meryl Streep appointed as co-guardian with specific responsibilities regarding education, financial support and emergency care." Judge Chen looked directly at Jamie. "This arrangement recognizes both your grandmother's irreplaceable role in your life and the practical support necessary to ensure your well-being and development. The court will review this arrangement in 6 months to ensure it remains in your best interest." She tapped her gavel once. Court adjourned. The relief that flooded through Jamie was so intense he felt lightheaded. They had won. He would stay with Grandma. Everything else, the documentary, school, the future, suddenly seemed manageable in comparison. Outside the courthouse, Catherine congratulated them while explaining the paperwork that would follow. Jamie hardly heard her, too overcome by the reality of their victory. "Thank you," he said to Meryl when they had a moment alone. "For everything." "You're the one who made this happen," Meryl replied. "From the moment you found my wallet and made the choice to return it. Everything since has simply been the universe responding to that act of integrity." A week later, life had settled into a new pattern. Eleanor continued her recovery at home with daily visits from a health aide. Jamie split his time between school, their apartment, and Meryl's studio, where he worked on a restored version of his documentary. Sophia had managed to recover most of the lost footage, and the film was nearly complete. Though they had missed the Young Filmmakers Festival deadline, Sophia had submitted it to 3 other festivals, with later deadlines. One evening, as Jamie was finalizing the end credits at Meryl's house, she entered the studio with an envelope. In hand. "Special delivery," she announced, handing it to him. Inside was an acceptance letter from the Thornton Film Academy, one of the most prestigious arts high schools in the country. "I don't understand," Jamie said, staring at the letter. "I never applied." "I showed your documentary to the director," Meryl explained. He was so impressed he offered you a full scholarship starting next fall. Jamie was speechless, overcome by the implications. The Thornton Academy was the launching pad for countless successful filmmakers, the kind of opportunity his father would have dreamed of for him. "But it's across town," he finally managed. "How would I—" "Transportation is part of the scholarship," Meryl assured him. "And your grandmother fully supports this. We discussed it during one of your school days." Jamie looked from the letter to Meryl, a future suddenly crystallizing before him, one where his passion could become his profession, where his father's legacy lived on through his own work. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say you'll accept," Meryl suggested with a smile. "Say you'll take this chance to become the filmmaker you're meant to be." Jamie nodded, unable to speak, past the lump in his throat. From a lost wallet, found in a park to this moment, the journey seemed impossible, yet here he was. That night, Jamie showed the acceptance letter to his grandmother. Her eyes filled with tears of joy as she read it. "Your parents would be so proud," she whispered. "I wish they could see the young man you're becoming." "I think they can," Jamie said, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "I think they've been watching over us all along." 1 year later, Jamie stood backstage at the Young Filmmakers Showcase, his heart pounding against his ribs. The past 12 months had transformed his life in ways he never could have imagined. That rainy day, he'd found Meryl Streep's wallet in the park. "Nervous?" Sophia asked, adjusting his tie. She had become much more than a mentor. She was family now, part of the expanded circle that had formed around Jamie and his grandmother. "Terrified," Jamie admitted with a shaky smile. "You've earned this moment," Sophia reminded him. "Own it." In the audience, Eleanor sat in the front row beside Meryl, both women beaming with pride. Eleanor's health had stabilized over the past year. While she would always need medication and monitoring, her quality of life had improved dramatically with proper care. The apartment they still shared had been renovated to accommodate her needs, though Jamie now spent 3 nights a week at Meryl's guest house when his Film Academy schedule required late hours. "And now," the MC announced, "our featured presentation." In the documentary category, The Waiting Room, directed by Jamie Silver, the lights dimmed, and Jamie's film began to play on the large screen. What had started as simple hospital footage had evolved into a powerful meditation on patience, hope, and healing. The audience fell silent, absorbed in the intimate portrayal of his grandmother's journey, interwoven with the stories of other families navigating medical crises. Jamie watched from the wings, seeing his work through new eyes. The technical skills he'd developed at Thornton Academy had refined his natural instincts, but the heart of the film remained pure, a grandson's love for his grandmother, a testament to resilience. When the credits rolled, the audience erupted. In applause, Jamie was called to the stage for a brief Q&A session. "What inspired you to make this film?" the moderator asked. Jamie glanced at his grandmother in the front row. "Initially, I was just documenting my grandmother's recovery to track her progress. But I realized her story connected to something universal, how we find strength during life's pauses, how we keep faith alive in waiting rooms." "You're only 14, another audience member noted. "How did you develop such sophisticated visual techniques?" Jamie smiled. "I had incredible mentors." He nodded toward Sophia. "And I guess it's in my blood. My father was a cinematographer." After the Q&A, Jamie was swarmed by well-wishers, including several film school representatives eager to discuss his future prospects. It felt surreal. A year ago, he'd been collecting recyclables to help pay for his grandmother's medication. Later that evening, Meryl hosted a small celebration dinner at her home. The guest list included everyone who had become important in Jamie's journey: Sophia and Thomas from the film crew, Dr. Harris, who had overseen Eleanor's care, Catherine Martinez, who had fought for their family in court, and even Mr. Beckman from school, who had become an unexpected ally in Jamie's educational path. "A toast," Meryl proposed, raising her glass, "to Jamie Silver, whose integrity and talent continue to inspire us all." "And to unexpected beginnings," Eleanor added, her eyes twinkling, "sometimes found in lost wallets." After dinner, Jamie slipped away to the garden for a moment of quiet reflection. The night air was cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. "Mind if I join you?" Meryl asked, appearing beside him. Jamie nodded, making room on the bench. "I have something for you," Meryl said, handing him a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with a simple camera icon. "Open it," Meryl encouraged. Jamie found a handwritten note on the first page, for Jamie. "To record the stories yet to be told. Your father once told me the best filmmakers are those who see the extraordinary in ordinary moments. He would be proud of how you've honored his legacy. Meryl." Jamie looked up in confusion. "My father told you? But how?" "I met James Silver once," Meryl explained. "Years ago when he was filming a documentary about arts education in underserved communities. I was being interviewed for it." She smiled at Jamie's astonishment. "I didn't make the connection until I saw your documentary footage. Something in your visual style reminded me of him. When I mentioned his name to Sophia, she confirmed they had worked together." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Jamie asked, stunned by this revelation. "I wanted to see you succeed on your own terms, not because of any connection," Meryl replied. "But watching your film today, I realized you'd already done that. You've earned every bit of recognition on your own merit." Jamie ran his fingers over the journal, overwhelmed by this unexpected link to his father. "Do you think," he began hesitantly, "do you think finding your wallet was just coincidence?" Meryl considered the question thoughtfully. "I've played enough roles to know that life has a poetry to it that science can't explain. Some might call it coincidence. I prefer to think of it as a silver lining, the brightness that emerges from life's darkest clouds." Back inside, Jamie found his grandmother deep in conversation with Dr. Harris about a new cardiac research program. "Jamie," Eleanor called, her face animated. "Dr. Harris has invited me to participate in a patient advocacy group at the hospital. They want to use some of your footage for their training programs." "That's wonderful, Grandma," Jamie said, touched by her enthusiasm. "Life doesn't end with illness," she said firmly. "It just takes a different path." As the evening wound down, Thomas pulled Jamie aside. "I have a proposal for you," he said. "I'm starting a new documentary project this summer, following young artists creating positive change in their communities. We need a second unit director with a fresh perspective." Jamie's eyes widened. "Are you offering me a job?" "A paid internship," Thomas clarified. "School still comes first, but this would be valuable experience. Sophia recommended you." Another door opening, another opportunity arising from that single act of integrity a year before. The following morning, Jamie visited Providence Square, the location where he'd first returned Meryl's wallet. The film set was long gone. The square returned to its everyday function as a public space. He sat on the same bench where he'd waited all those months ago, camera in hand. A young boy nearby was struggling to collect cans from a trash bin, reminding Jamie powerfully of himself. On impulse, Jamie approached him. "Need some help?" he offered. The boy regarded him suspiciously. "Why would you help me?" "Because someone helped me once," Jamie replied simply. "Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything." After assisting the boy, Jamie gave him his card with the contact information for a new foundation Meryl had established, the Silver Lining Fund, designed to support talented young people facing financial hardships. Jamie served on its youth advisory board, helping identify candidates for arts scholarships and mentorship programs. That evening, as Jamie edited footage in the small studio that had been added to their renovated apartment, Eleanor brought him a cup of tea. "I found something today while organizing old photos," she said, placing a faded picture beside his computer. The photograph showed his father as a young man, camera in hand, standing proudly on a film set. The resemblance between them was striking. "Your grandfather took this on your father's first professional job," Eleanor explained. "He kept it in his wallet always for luck." Jamie picked up the photo carefully. "I wish I could talk to him now, show him what I'm doing." "He sees," Eleanor said with quiet certainty. "Just as he guided you to that wallet in the park." Jamie smiled at his grandmother's unwavering faith. Whether by cosmic design or beautiful coincidence, finding Meryl Streep's wallet had altered the trajectory of his life, not just through the opportunities it created, but through the connections it forged. As he returned to his editing, Jamie reflected on the journey of the past year, from a desperate boy collecting recyclables to a young filmmaker with a future full of promise, from a fragile family of two struggling to survive to an expanded circle of chosen family supporting each other through whatever came next. Some might call it luck, finding that wallet in the rain, but Jamie preferred his grandmother's interpretation. A silver lining, appearing exactly when they needed it most.